One year after the competition, Clara stood in front of her new studio in Shanghai. The sign above the door read Bridge Arts Academy in both Earth languages and Draconid script. Behind her, Marcus was helping a young Draconid student adjust to Earth's gravity. "Remember," she heard him say, "being solid isn't a weakness. It's a foundation to build upon." Clara smiled, remembering her own first days on Earth. So much had changed since then. The competition had indeed changed her life, but not in the way anyone expected. She hadn't won first place, that had gone to an Andorian ice sculptor. But her piece had won something more valuable: the Special Innovation Award, created specifically to recognize art that bridged cultural boundaries. More importantly, it had started a conversation throughout the artistic community. Now, a year later, she was opening the first school dedicated to teaching cross-cultural art. Her first class included students from 12 different worlds, including 3 young Draconids whose parents had seen her work at the competition. Professor Clara, a human student, approached her, holding a light crystal uncertainly. "I'm afraid I'll break it. It looks so delicate." "Here," Clara said, taking the student's hands. "Light crystals are stronger than they appear, like most things in this universe." Her parents had come around too, in their own way. They still lived on Centauri Prime, still followed many traditions, but they changed. Her mother had started working with color crystals again, creating art she'd dreamed of making in her youth. Her father had even touched one of Clara's sculptures on his last visit, though he still pretended it hadn't happened. "Your next class is arriving," Marcus said, coming to stand beside her. Their relationship had grown stronger too, though it had shocked both their societies. They'd announced it formally 3 months ago, becoming the first human Draconid couple in the art world. The news feeds had exploded, of course. Some called it a scandal, but others saw it as another bridge being built, another boundary being crossed. Inside her classroom, Clara watched as her students settled in, humans sitting next to aliens, traditional artists next to experimental ones. On the walls, art pieces combined techniques and materials from dozens of worlds. "Today," she began, "we're going to talk about breaking rules." She picked up a light crystal and a piece of earth metal. Sometimes, the most beautiful things come from combining what others say can't be combined. A small Draconid girl raised her hand. "But my parents say we shouldn't touch art, that it should float and be pure." Clara smiled gently. "Come here," she said. She placed the light crystal in the girl's hands, then helped her press it into the soft metal. The crystal's glow spread through the metal, creating patterns no one had ever seen before. The girl's scales flickered with wonder. "It's beautiful." "Yes," Clara said, "because you weren't afraid to try something new." After class, she found Marcus waiting in her office. "The Galactic Arts Council called," he said. "They want you to speak at next month's conference about the future of integrated art." Clara touched the small sculpture on her desk, her very first piece combining Draconid and human elements. "Did I ever tell you what Cyril said to me after the competition?" Marcus shook his head. "She said I would regret choosing this path, that I would end up alone." Clara looked around her studio, at the students practicing outside, at the man she loved. "But I've never felt less alone." Marcus took her hand, his warm human skin against her strong purple scales. "Ready to head home?" "Yes," she said, looking at their joined hands, so different, yet fitting together so perfectly. "Though I think I've been home ever since I found the courage to be myself." Together, they walked out into the Neo-Shanghai evening, where Earth's setting sun painted the sky in colors that would have inspired artists on any world. The morning of the exhibition brought chaos to the Academy's Grand Hall. Students rushed to perfect their displays while visitors from across the galaxy began to arrive. Clara stood beside her finished piece, watching as elegant Draconids and other alien species floated past without stopping. Then she noticed him, a human, standing out sharply among the ethereal aliens. While others moved like whispers through the hall, his footsteps made solid sounds against the crystal floor. He wore a simple black suit that contrasted with the flowing, shimmering robes of the other visitors. "Fascinating work," he said, stopping at her display. His eyes, a warm brown color Clara had never seen among her people, studied her sculpture with genuine interest. "The way you've captured the violence and beauty of a solar storm, it's remarkable." Clara blinked in surprise. "You can tell it's a solar storm." Marcus Chen, he introduced himself with a slight bow. Earth's cultural exchange curator. And yes, I recognized it immediately. I saw something similar from the observation deck of the Beijing space station last year. Before Clara could respond, Professor Visari glided over. "Ah, Mr. Chen, I see you found our most unique student." Her scales flickered with embarrassment. "Perhaps you'd like to see some of our more traditional pieces." Marcus didn't move. "Actually, I'd love to hear more about this piece." He turned back to Clara. "The texture work is extraordinary. Most Draconid art I've seen focuses on light and reflection, but you've created something that begs to be touched." "That's exactly what I wanted." Clara's excitement made her forget her usual reserve. Art shouldn't just be for looking at from a distance. It should make you feel something, make you want to reach out and connect with it. Professor Viseri's scales turned a pale shade of horror at this outburst, but Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "It reminds me of Earth's abstract expressionists," he said. "Artists who broke away from traditional forms to express raw emotion and energy." "Have you studied human art history?" Clara shook her head. "We don't really study Earth art here. The Academy focuses on preserving pure Draconid artistic traditions." "Pure tradition can become a cage," Marcus said quietly. Then, louder, "Would you be interested in learning? The Cultural Exchange Program is looking for artists who can bridge different artistic perspectives." Professor Viseri interrupted smoothly. "Surely you don't want to waste your time with experimental works. Let me show you Sorel's light sculpture. It won last year's." "I want to see more of Clara's work," Marcus said firmly. His voice, while polite, had a strength that made the professor pause. "Do you have other pieces?" Clara led him to her studio workspace, aware of the whispers that followed them. Marcus spent hours examining each piece, asking questions about her techniques and inspiration. He didn't seem to care that her art broke every Draconid tradition. "These would create quite a stir in Earth's galleries," he said finally. "We value innovation, the courage to break new ground." He pulled out a folder, not the pastel ones other curators carried, but a simple black one. "I'm offering you an apprenticeship at my gallery in Neo-Shanghai. 6 months to start, with the possibility of extension." Clara stared at the folder. "But I'm not what galleries want. I'm too different." Marcus smiled. "On Earth, different is valuable. We believe art should challenge us, make us think and feel in new ways." He placed the folder in her hands. "Think about it. Earth might surprise you." After he left, Clara held the folder close. For the first time in her life, someone had looked at her art, at her, and seen value instead of flaws. As the 3 suns set outside her window, she opened the folder and began to read about a world where being different might finally mean being free. The black folder sat on Clara's desk like a challenge. 3 days had passed since Marcus Chen's offer, and she still hadn't given him an answer. Outside her studio window, the smallest of Centauri Prime's suns was setting, painting the sky in deep purples that matched her scales. Her communication panel lit up with an incoming call. Clara's stomach tightened when she saw it was her father this time. "Your mother tells me you received an offer," he said without greeting. His scales were a harsh metallic gray, the color of disappointment in their culture. "From a human." "Yes, father. Marcus Chen wants me to study Earth art and..." "Earth art." He spat the words like they tasted bitter. "They barely have 1,000 years of artistic history. We have been perfecting our craft for 20,000 years." His scales rippled. "You will decline this offer immediately." Clara looked at her latest work, a massive piece combining traditional Draconid light-catching crystals with rough-hewn metal in a way no one had tried before. I can't keep making art that isn't true to who I am. Then you leave us no choice. Her father's voice turned cold. Accept this human's offer, and you will no longer be welcome in our house. No gallery on Centauri Prime will show your work. You will be alone. The screen went dark before she could respond. Clara's hands trembled as she touched her sculpture. The metal was warm under her fingers, so different from the cool, untouchable light sculptures her people preferred. The next morning, she brought her new piece to the Academy's main gallery for the monthly student showcase. As she set it up, whispers spread through the hall like ripples in still water. Is that metal? With sacred light crystals? How dare she combine them? Such disrespect. Professor Viserys approached, her scales pale with shock. Clara, remove this at once. You cannot display such a mockery of our traditions. It's not mockery, Clara said, her voice stronger than she felt. It's evolution. Art shouldn't stay frozen in time. It should grow, change, become something new. A crowd gathered, drawn by the professor's raised voice. Other students watched with mixed expressions of horror and fascination as Clara stood her ground. This is your final warning, Professor Viserys said. Remove this piece, or you will be asked to leave the academy. Clara looked at her sculpture. Sunlight caught the crystals, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the metal surfaces. It was beautiful, not in the traditional Draconid way, but in its own unique way, just like her. No, she said quietly. I won't remove it. The professor's scales flickered with fury. Then you are no longer welcome here. Pack your things and be gone by sunset. As word spread through the academy, Clara returned to her studio. Her hands moved automatically, packing her tools and materials. The black folder still sat on her desk. She opened it again, reading Marcus's words about Earth's galleries, about a place where different wasn't wrong. Her communication panel chimed. It was Marcus. I heard what happened, he said, his human face showing concern. My offer still stands. Earth welcomes artists who push boundaries. Clara looked around her studio one last time. Everything she had known, everything she had been taught to value, was here. But so was every restriction, every disapproving glance, every reminder that she didn't fit. I accept, she said, surprising herself with how right the words felt. When can I leave? Marcus smiled. There's a transport leaving tomorrow morning. I'll send you the details. As she packed the last of her belongings, Clara felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. Maybe Earth, with its solid ground and substantial people, would understand her substantial art better than her floating, ethereal homeworld ever had. Clara's first step onto Earth nearly sent her crashing to the ground. After the lighter gravity of Centauri Prime, Earth's pull felt like wearing a suit made of metal. Around her, the Neo-Shanghai spaceport buzzed with activity as humans and aliens rushed in all directions. You'll adapt to the gravity in a few days, Marcus said, steadying her with a gentle hand. Most newcomers struggle at first. She nodded, trying to hide how much effort it took just to stand straight. The air felt thick, heavy with moisture that made her scales tingle. Through the spaceport's massive windows, she could see buildings that stretched into the clouds, their surfaces gleaming with a mix of ancient Chinese architecture and ultra-modern design. It's so solid, she whispered. Unlike the floating crystal cities of her homeworld, everything here seemed firmly connected to the ground. Marcus led her to a ground car, another novelty for someone used to floating transport pods. As they drove through the city, Clara pressed her face against the window, taking in everything. Streets filled with humans of different colors and shapes, aliens from dozens of worlds walking among them. Art displayed everywhere, on walls, in windows, floating on massive holoscreens. Your gallery is in this area, she asked as they entered the city's cultural district. Right here, Marcus said, stopping in front of a building that looked like a fusion of glass and stone. The Chen Gallery of Interstellar Arts. Inside, Clara's breath caught. The gallery was nothing like the sterile, floating displays of Centauri Prime. Here, art pieces sat on solid pedestals, hung from real walls, invited viewers to come close. And the art itself, she had never seen such variety. "That's a Martian dust sculpture next to an Andorian ice painting," Marcus explained, leading her through the gallery. "And over there, that's a human child's finger painting next to a Vulcan logic diagram. We believe art is about connection, not separation." They reached a large workspace in the back of the gallery. "This will be your studio," Marcus said. "The gravity compensators are adjustable, so you can work comfortably while you adapt." Clara touched the solid metal workbench, ran her hands over the tools laid out for her. Everything felt real, touchable, present. "There's something else I want to show you," Marcus said. He led her to a small display area near the front of the gallery. "This space is reserved for your first Earth exhibition. 3 months from now." 3 months? Clara's scales flickered with panic. "But I don't even know Earth art styles yet." "Then let me teach you." Marcus pulled out a tablet. "We'll start with Earth's art history. But remember, the goal isn't to copy our styles. It's to find your own voice." Over the next few hours, Marcus showed her images of Earth art through the ages. Cave paintings made by ancient humans, Renaissance masterpieces, modern abstract works, street art, digital creations. Each style was different, each artist unique. "How can you have so many different styles?" she asked. "On Centauri Prime, there's only one right way to make art. Earth learned long ago that there's no single right way to create beauty." Marcus said, "Our strength comes from our differences, not our similarities." As the Earth's single sun set outside, another thing to get used to, Clara felt something shift inside her. The heavy gravity that had seemed so uncomfortable now felt like an embrace, keeping her grounded and secure. The thick air carried scents of a million different things, all mixing together to create something new. "I think," she said slowly, touching the workbench again, "I'm going to like it here." Marcus smiled. Earth has a saying, "Home is where you can be yourself." Welcome home, Clara. 3 months on Earth had changed Clara in ways she never expected. Her body had grown stronger from Earth's gravity, her scales taking on a deeper, richer purple. Her art had changed too, becoming something that was neither purely Draconid nor human, but uniquely her own. "The Interstellar Art Competition opens tomorrow," Marcus said, helping her position her piece in the gallery's main hall. "Are you ready?" Clara touched her creation, a massive sculpture combining traditional Draconid-like crystals with earth metals and stone. Unlike traditional Draconid art that floated untouchably, her piece grew from the ground up, encouraging viewers to walk around it, to touch it, to feel its energy. "I think so," she said, "though I wish." She stopped as the gallery's front door chimed. A group of Draconids entered, their scales shimmering with barely hidden disgust as they looked around. Leading them was Sorel, the top student from her old academy. "So this is where you've hidden yourself," Sorel said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Among the humans and their primitive art." Marcus stepped forward, but Clara touched his arm. "Sorel, are you here for the competition?" "Of course. Someone needs to show these humans what real Draconid art looks like." Sorel's eyes fixed on Clara's sculpture. "Though I see you're still making your experiments." "My art represents who I am now," Clara said, "both Draconid and something new." Sorel's scales flickered with anger. "You dishonor our entire species, using sacred light crystals in this way, mixing them with human materials. It's blasphemy." Other competition participants were arriving now, drawn by the raised voices. Humans, aliens, and more Draconids gathered to watch. "Art shouldn't be locked in the past," Clara said, her voice stronger than she felt. "It should grow, change, become something more." "Growth?" Sorel laughed. "Is that what you call this betrayal? First you corrupt our art forms, and now you let this human court you like some common. That's enough." Marcus's voice was quiet but firm. This is a place of artistic expression and respect. If you can't maintain that standard, you'll need to leave. Cheryl's scales turned pale with fury. The Council of Arts will hear about this. About all of it. She turned to the watching crowd. See how far she's fallen. Living among humans, corrupting our sacred art, even taking the human mate. Clara felt her scales heat with embarrassment, but then she saw something unexpected. The other artists, human and alien alike, weren't looking at her with disgust. They were looking at Sorel with disappointment. I think, said a tall Andorian, that her work shows great courage. Breaking from tradition is never easy. The combination of techniques is fascinating, added a human artist. I've never seen light crystals used this way before. One by one, other artists spoke up, praising the innovation, the bravery, the beauty of mixing different artistic traditions. Sorel's scales flickered rapidly as she lost control of the situation. You'll regret this, she hissed at Clara. All of you will. She turned and swept out of the gallery, her followers trailing behind her. Clara's legs felt weak. Marcus steadied her with a gentle hand. Are you okay? He asked softly. She looked at her sculpture, then at the supportive faces around her. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outcast. Here, among humans and aliens who valued creativity over conformity, she had found her place. Yes, she said, I'm more than okay. She straightened up, her scales gleaming with pride. Help me finish setting up. The competition starts tomorrow, and my piece needs to be perfect. Marcus smiled, and together they turned back to her creation. A bridge between worlds, just like she was becoming. The morning after Sorel's confrontation, Clara arrived at the gallery early to find two familiar figures waiting outside. Her scales went cold. Her parents stood there, looking out of place in their floating draconid robes among the solid buildings of Neo-Shinai. Mother, father, her voice came out as a whisper. They turned, and her mother's scales flickered with shock. Clara, your scales. They're so solid. Earth's gravity, Clara explained, touching her deeper purple scales. It's made me stronger. We saw the news feeds, her father said stiffly, about your exhibition piece, and about the human. Marcus chose that moment to arrive. He stopped a respectful distance away, but Clara's father's scales darkened at the sight of him. So it's true, her father said. You've chosen to disgrace yourself with a human. Marcus has shown me nothing but respect and understanding, Clara said, standing straighter despite the trembling in her legs. He sees value in who I am, not who others want me to be. And who are you? Her mother demanded. Look at yourself, standing like a human, working with crude materials, mixing our sacred art with their primitive methods. I am your daughter, Clara said quietly. I'm still draconid, but I'm also an artist who wants to create something new. Her father moved closer, his voice dropping low. Come home with us. Now, we can still fix this. The Academy might take you back if you renounce these experiments. Fix what? Marcus spoke for the first time. Your daughter is creating revolutionary art. She's bridging cultures in ways no one has done before. This doesn't concern you, human, her father snapped. Yes, it does, Marcus replied calmly. Clara is part of my gallery now, part of Earth's artistic community. We value her exactly as she is. Clara's mother's scales shifted to a surprising color, one Clara hadn't seen before. Was that uncertainty? Show us, her mother said suddenly. What? Clara and her father spoke at the same time. Show us your work. Show us why you chose this path. Clara looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. She led her parents into the gallery, to her competition piece. This is what I create now, she said, touching the sculpture. The light crystals represent our traditions, our heritage, but the metal and stone show strength, connection to the ground we stand on. Together, they make something neither culture could create alone. Her mother reached out, then hesitated. We don't touch art, she said uncertainly. Here you can, Clara said softly. Art should be felt, not just seen. Slowly, her mother's hand touched the sculpture. Her scales flickered with surprise. It's warm, alive. Her father stayed back, but his scales had shifted to that same uncertain color. You truly believe in this path? I do, Clara said. Earth has taught me that being different isn't wrong. That art can be whatever we dare to make it. Her mother's hand was still on the sculpture. When I was young, she said quietly, I wanted to work with color crystals instead of light crystals, but my parents said it wasn't proper. You never told me that, Clara's father said, surprised. Because we never talk about such things. Her mother turned to Clara. Perhaps that was wrong. Clara felt tears in her eyes, a very human reaction she'd picked up. Will you stay for the competition tomorrow? Her parents exchanged looks. Finally, her father's scales settled into a calmer color. We will stay, he said. We may not understand your choices, but we will try to see through your eyes. Marcus, who had kept a respectful distance, smiled at Clara. In that moment, she felt as though the two halves of her world were finally starting to come together. The day of the competition arrived with Earth's single sun rising over Neo-Shanghai. The Chen Gallery was packed with artists, critics, and visitors from across the galaxy. Clara stood near her sculpture, her parents sitting in the front row, still looking uncomfortable but present. Shrill's traditional light sculpture floated in the center of her display area, drawing gasps of appreciation from the Draconid visitors. It was perfect, floating, and untouchable, just like all traditional Draconid art. The judges are starting their rounds, Marcus whispered, touching Clara's arm gently. Her scales tingled at his touch, something her parents pretended not to notice. The judge panel was diverse. A Draconid art master, a human curator, an Andorian crystal artist, and others from across the galaxy. They moved slowly through the exhibition, studying each piece carefully. When they reached Shrill's display, the Draconid judge's scales flickered with approval. Exquisite control of light and space, he said. A perfect example of pure Draconid artistry. Shrill's scales shimmered with pride as she bowed. I live to honor our traditions, she said, shooting a pointed look at Clara. Then the judges reached Clara's piece. Her heart pounded as they circled it slowly, taking in how the light crystals interacted with the metal and stone, how the whole piece seemed to grow from Earth itself while reaching toward the stars. You invite touching? The Andorian judge asked, noting how other visitors were running their hands along the sculpture's surface. Yes, Clara said. Art should be experienced, not just observed. The Draconid judge's scales flickered with disapproval, but the human judge stepped forward and placed her hand on the sculpture. It's warm, she said with surprise. And it pulses like a heartbeat. The metal conducts heat from those who touch it, Clara explained. The more people interact with it, the more alive it becomes, like connections between different cultures, growing stronger with each interaction. The Andorian judge touched it next, then the others followed. Even the Draconid judge, after much hesitation, reached out a single finger. His scales flickered rapidly. This is not traditional, he said slowly, but he seemed to struggle for words. But it makes you feel something, the human judge finished. Something new. A crowd had gathered, watching the judge's reaction. Clara saw her parents leaning forward in their seats. Her mother's hand was clasped tightly in her father's. The technique of combining light crystals with solid materials is revolutionary, the Andorian judge said. The way they enhance each other instead of competing. It's a perfect metaphor for cultural integration. The human judge added. Earth and Centauri Prime, together creating something entirely new. Shrill pushed forward. But it's not pure. It's not our way. Perhaps, the Draconid judge said, surprising everyone. It is time for our way to grow. Clara felt Marcus's hand slip into hers. Around her sculpture, Visitors from different worlds were touching it, talking to each other, sharing their reactions. Humans and aliens, critics and artists, even some traditional draconids, all connecting through her art. The judges moved away to deliberate, but Clara hardly noticed. She was watching a young draconid child, probably visiting Earth for the first time, pressing both hands against her sculpture in wonder. The child's scales flickered with joy as the metal warmed under their touch. "That's why I make art," she whispered to Marcus. "Not for judges or tradition, but for moments like this." He squeezed her hand. "You've created more than art," he said. "You've created understanding." Looking around the gallery, at her parents trying to hide their pride, at the mixed crowd appreciating her work, at Marcus standing steadfast beside her, Clara realized that she had indeed created something far more valuable than just a sculpture. She had built a bridge between worlds, and people were finally crossing it. 1 year after the competition, Clara stood in front of her new studio in Shanghai. The sign above the door read Bridge Arts Academy in both Earth languages and Draconid script. Behind her, Marcus was helping a young Draconid student adjust to Earth's gravity. "Remember," she heard him say, "being solid isn't a weakness. It's a foundation to build upon." Clara smiled, remembering her own first days on Earth. So much had changed since then. The competition had indeed changed her life, but not in the way anyone expected. She hadn't won first place, that had gone to an Andorian ice sculptor, but her piece had won something more valuable. The Special Innovation Award, created specifically to recognize art that bridged cultural boundaries. More importantly, it had started a conversation throughout the artistic community. Now, a year later, she was opening the first school dedicated to teaching cross-cultural art. Her first class included students from 12 different worlds, including 3 young draconids whose parents had seen her work at the competition. Professor Clara, a human student, approached her, holding a light crystal uncertainly. "I'm afraid I'll break it. It looks so delicate." "Here," Clara said, taking the student's hands. "Light crystals are stronger than they appear, like most things in this universe." Her parents had come around too in their own way. They still lived on Centauri Prime, still followed many traditions, but they'd change. Her mother had started working with color crystals again, creating art she'd dreamed of making in her youth. Her father had even touched one of Clara's sculptures on his last visit, though he still pretended it hadn't happened. "Your next class is arriving," Marcus said, coming to stand beside her. Their relationship had grown stronger too, though it had shocked both their societies. They'd announced it formally 3 months ago, becoming the first human draconid couple in the art world. The news feeds had exploded, of course. Some called it a scandal, but others saw it as another bridge being built, another boundary being crossed. Inside her classroom, Clara watched as her students settled in, humans sitting next to aliens, traditional artists next to experimental ones. On the walls, art pieces combined techniques and materials from dozens of worlds. "Today," she began, "we're going to talk about breaking rules." She picked up a light crystal and a piece of earth metal. Sometimes, the most beautiful things come from combining what others say can't be combined. A small draconid girl raised her hand. "But my parents say we shouldn't touch art, that it should float and be pure." Clara smiled gently. "Come here," she said. She placed the light crystal in the girl's hands, then helped her press it into the soft metal. The crystal's glow spread through the metal, creating patterns no one had ever seen before. The girl's scales flickered with wonder. "It's beautiful." "Yes," Clara said, "because you weren't afraid to try something new." After class, she found Marcus waiting in her office. "The Galactic Arts Council called," he said. "They want you to speak at next month's conference about the future of integrated art." Clara touched the small sculpture on her desk, her very first piece combining draconid and human elements. "Did I ever tell you what Cyril said to me after the competition?" Marcus shook his head. "She said I would regret choosing this path, that I would end up alone." Clara looked around her studio. at the students practicing outside, at the man she loved. But I've never felt less alone. Marcus took her hand, his warm human skin against her strong purple scales, ready to head home. Yes, she said, looking at their joined hands, so different, yet fitting together so perfectly. Though I think I've been home ever since I found the courage to be myself. Together, they walked out into the Neo-Shanghai evening, where Earth's setting sun painted the sky in colors that would have inspired artists on any world.